The gymnasium in Marsh County, Nebraska smelled like popcorn and diesel, and every folding chair was full. It was the annual Farm Futures panel, the one night a year when the three richest farmers in the state sat on a stage under fluorescent lights and told 400 struggling families how they'd made it. Beauregard Stanton, who ran 9,000 acres of corn and soybeans. Otis Hargrove, who turned a single hog barn into the largest pork operation in 3 counties. And Thaddeus Crane, whose name was on grain elevators from Omaha to Sioux Falls. A 7-year-old girl named Etta Mae Culpepper stood up in the third row, her boots 2 sizes too big because they'd been her older brother's, and asked the question nobody else in that room had the nerve to ask. If y'all are so smart about farming, how come my daddy works twice as hard as you and he's still broke? The gymnasium exploded into laughter. Beauregard Stanton laughed so hard he had to take off his glasses and wipe his eyes. Otis Hargrove shook his head and said, "Somebody get this kid a juice box." Even Etta Mae's own mother put a hand over her face, half mortified, half trying not to laugh herself. But Thaddeus Crane didn't laugh. He leaned into the microphone, looked out at the crowd until it went quiet, and said something that would follow Etta Mae Culpepper for the next 23 years of her life. "Young lady, that's the only real question anybody's asked me tonight. Come see me after." Nobody in Marsh County knew it yet, but the little girl in her brother's boots was about to learn the 3 things that separate a farmer who survives from a farmer who builds a fortune, and she was going to learn them so well that one day, all 3 men on that stage would be working for her. Etta Mae grew up on 80 acres of land her grandfather had homesteaded, the kind of farm that had been getting by for 3 generations. Her father, Walton Culpepper, was not a lazy man or a foolish one. He worked from before sunrise until after dark, 7 days most weeks. But he farmed the exact same way his own father had one crop, corn, sold the moment it came off the field to whichever grain buyer showed up first, and every input bought on credit against next year's harvest. When the price of corn dropped, the Culpeppers didn't just have a bad year. They had a year that erased the good year before it, and sometimes the good year before that too. This is the first hard truth that most people outside of farming never learn. Hard work and good soil do not automatically make money. A farm is not just a piece of land. It's a business sitting on top of weather, debt, markets, and timing, and a farmer who doesn't understand all 4 of those things can work himself into the ground and still lose everything. Thaddeus Crane understood this better than almost anyone in the state, and that night after the panel, he sat little Etta Mae down at a card table backstage with a bag of animal crackers and explained it to her the way you'd explain it to an adult, because he believed kids could handle more truth than grown-ups gave them credit for. "Your daddy grows one thing and sells it the day it's ready," Crane told her. "That means the whole year of his life is riding on one price on one day that he doesn't control. I grow 4 things. I store what I grow instead of selling it all at once, and I own the equipment that turns my crop into something worth more than the raw crop itself. That's the whole secret. It's not one secret, it's 3. Etta Mae, 7 years old, asked him to say it again slower so she could remember it. He did. She never forgot it. For the next 10 years, Etta Mae Culpepper did something almost nobody her age did. She treated the family kitchen table like a business school. She rode along with her father to the grain elevator and started asking the buyers questions about why the price changed week to week. She got a library card renewed every month at the tiny Marsh County branch and checked out every book on soil science and agricultural economics the librarian could find or order in. By 14, she was keeping her own ledger of what it actually cost the family to grow 1 acre of corn versus what they sold it for. And she showed her father, gently, that some years they were losing money and didn't even know it because they'd never separated fuel costs from seed costs from equipment repair. At 16, she talked her father into something radical for a farm that had grown only corn for 60 years. She convinced him to plant 5 acres of soybeans in rotation and 5 acres of a cover crop called cereal rye that wouldn't be sold at all, just plowed back into the soil after winter. This is the second lesson Etta Mae had learned from Thaddeus Crane and had spent a decade researching on her own. Diversification isn't just about growing different things to sell. It's about protecting the soil itself, because soil that's forced to grow the same crop year after year gets thinner, loses nutrients, and eventually stops producing well no matter how much fertilizer you dump on it. Crop rotation and cover cropping put nitrogen back into the ground for free, using nothing but a plant's own roots and the natural decay of organic matter. Farmers who understood this in the 1990s and 2000s, back before regenerative agriculture was a phrase anyone used on the news, were decades ahead of the ones who didn't. The 5 acres of rotated ground outperformed the rest of the farm by nearly 30% within 3 years. Walton Culpepper, a stubborn man but not a foolish one, converted another 20 acres the following spring. The third lesson was the hardest one for the Culpepper family to accept, because it went against everything a proud, self-reliant farm family believed about doing things themselves. At 19, home from 2 years of agricultural economics classes at the University of Nebraska, paid for by a combination of scholarships and a summer job hauling grain for, of all people, Otis Hargrove's operation, Etta Mae sat her parents down and told them something that made her father go quiet for a long time. "We need to stop selling to the elevator the day the corn comes off the field." She explained what she'd learned working summers for Hargrove. Big operations didn't sell their whole crop the moment harvest ended. They built or rented storage grain bins so they could hold their corn and sell it in pieces over the following 6 to 8 months, watching the market and selling into price spikes instead of whatever number happened to be posted on a random Tuesday in October. Storage cost money up front, yes. But it meant a farmer was no longer forced to accept the worst possible price simply because harvest deadlines and cash flow desperation left him no choice. Walton Culpepper had never had 2 nickels to rub together in November, let alone the money to build a grain bin. So Etta Mae did something that stunned the whole county. She went alone, 19 years old, to the Marsh County Farm Credit Office and asked for a loan not to buy more land, which is what every young farmer asked for, but to build storage. She'd written a business plan. She had 3 years of her own ledgers as proof she understood margins better than farmers twice her age. The loan officer, a careful man named Delmer Vance who had turned down bigger and older applicants that same month, approved it. The first year with storage, the Culpepper farm made more net profit than it had in the previous 4 years combined. Here is where most inspiring farm stories would end. Hardworking family finally gets ahead. Everybody claps, roll credits. But Etta Mae Culpepper wasn't finished. And this is the part of the story that actually explains how she became wealthier than the 3 men who'd laughed at her 12 years earlier. She noticed something on her drives to the grain elevator. Trucks from small farms all over Marsh County making the same mistake her family used to make, selling everything the day it came off the field because they had nowhere to store it and no cash reserve to wait. So at 26, with the profits she'd saved up over the 7 years since building that first bin, Etta Mae built a second, much larger set of grain bins bigger than her own farm needed and started offering storage space to her neighbors for a fee, along with something even more valuable: her market knowledge, helping small farmers decide when to sell. This is the piece of the puzzle that separates a farmer who does well from a farmer who builds real, lasting wealth. And it's the same principle behind almost every self-made fortune in agriculture, whether it's grain, cattle, or produce. The money isn't just in growing the crop. It's in controlling what happens to the crop after it leaves the field: the storage, the transportation, the processing, the timing of the sale. Farmers who only grow and sell raw commodities are always at the mercy of buyers. Farmers who own a piece of the supply chain capture profit at every stage, instead of just one. By 30, Etta Mae Culpepper owned storage and logistics contracts with over 60 family farms across 3 counties. By 34, she'd added a small processing facility that turned local corn into higher-value livestock feed sold directly to hog and cattle operations, cutting out a middleman that had been taking a cut for decades. She named the company Kestrel Grain, a nod to the small, fierce prairie falcon that farmers see hovering over Nebraska fields, a bird that survives not through size but through precision. 30 years, almost to the month, after a little girl in oversized boots asked a question that made a gymnasium full of adults laugh at her. Etta Mae Culpepper sat on the stage of that same Farm Futures panel, not in the audience this time, but as the keynote speaker, because Kestrel Grain's storage, logistics, and processing network had grown into one of the largest independent agricultural service companies in the state, valued at well over $40 million. Otis Hargrove's hog operation had been struggling for years against rising feed costs. He now bought his feed processing services through Kestrel Grain. Beauregard Stanton had scaled back his acreage after a series of bad years and leased storage space in one of Etta Mae's bins. And Thaddeus Crane, the one man who hadn't laughed, the man who'd handed a 7-year-old the blueprint for everything that followed, sat in the front row, 81 years old now, and watched her walk to the podium. She didn't gloat. She didn't even mention the laughter from 3 decades earlier. She simply looked out at the crowd full of young farmers, worried farmers, farmers whose fathers were exactly like her father had been, and she told them the same 3 things Thaddeus Crane had once told her over a card table and a bag of animal crackers. Don't put your whole year at the mercy of one crop and one sale date. Take care of your soil like it's the only asset that actually compounds. And whenever you can, own a piece of what happens to your crop after it leaves your field, because that's where the real money has been hiding the entire time. Then she looked directly at Thaddeus Crane and said, "It just took me a little longer to say it well as it took him to say it right." The gymnasium didn't laugh this time. It stood up and applauded.